What up, YouTube? It's me, Hetsuka. Today in this video, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna present you guys a deck list of decks that I think are really good at climbing in Shadowverse ranked. And if you may not know, I've been playing Shadowverse for I technically started around December, but I didn't really get into it until the Miku collab happened, which was around March, I think. So I've been playing Shadowverse religiously for about 2 months now. I've gotten to the point where people would probably call me a sweat. I'm going to present you guys with a tier list on decks that I think are really good at climbing and ladder. All right, so here's what we have. Let me explain the categories and the decks and all that sort. So S tier, I think, is obviously the best deck you can use to climb the ladder with. A tier, pretty good. B, it's not bad. It's perhaps like 50-50, maybe more match dependent and stuff of that sort. C, you're gonna have to work really hard for that one. Unfortunately, it's a very unfavored deck at the moment. And then there's D tier, which is, hey man, you gotta you gotta draw really good, and your opponent's gotta draw really good, or they gotta really misplay. All right. Now let's start with the first one. This is gonna be Fairy Forest, right? Then it's going to be Burial Rite Shadow, Chess Rune. This is Vengeance Blood, Mysteria Rune, Mars Sword, Discard Dragon, Buff Dragon, Amulet, or no, it's not called Amulet. It's called, no, is it called, or is it Artifacts? Amulet, Havencraft, and then this is, what was it, Wrath Blood. Yeah, this is Wrath Blood. There's no Portalcraft here, unfortunately. I don't think Portalcraft's in a very good situation at the moment compared to these other powerhouse decks, right? So if you guys were watching my streams or all of that sorts, the deck that I've actually been, the first deck that I actually made and climbed with was Fairycraft, Forest Fairycraft. And here's the thing, dude. The deck has clear strengths, but also clear weaknesses, right? Because you have to sequence your legendaries in a certain way for them to actually pop off. And they do suffer from certain matchups, which is why, like, I believe Fairycraft is probably around B tier in climbing because it has the aggression, it has the pop off in mid and late game for after you set up in the early game to absolutely wipe the board with most decks, especially if you go into the perfect legendary sequence of Plumeria turn 2 or 3, and then turn 4 or 5 if you're going first or second, depending. You can Valkyrie with a direct hit to their face, with a storm to their face, and then you can set up for Nobilis into Philly, which oftentimes, if you set up that perfect sequence and they aren't healing or they aren't clearing your stuff efficiently, they're mostly gonna win. But as I said before, you have to hit that sequence of legendaries, as well as your opponent has gotta have not have taunts to counteract you or heals, which is why, like, I believe it's in B tier. It's a pretty good deck to climb with, actually. It suffers from its own inconsistencies, unfortunately, as well as certain matchups are very difficult for you to fight in. Burial Rite Shadowcraft. Okay, let me tell you about Burial Rite Shadow. I think it is actually the strongest deck in the meta right now, mostly because it has, So when I was laddering, I had a lot of issues with Burial Rite Shadowcraft, because they have early control and early board clears. They have burn effects to slowly chip away at your life, and then once they hit late game, they just kind of overwhelm you with their power cards. I do think and the deck itself is actually incredibly consistent, and I think it's perhaps like the strongest deck to climb with. I would put it in S tier. I think this is the tier, the best deck right now in the format. And this was like pre and post the mini expansion. Chess Rune. Here's the thing with Chess Rune, right? In pre expansion, it was very heavily dependent on hitting your is it priest, the one that's you activate spells and then you get a token or you get a pawn and all that stuff, right? But with the introduction of priest and other stuff, it actually makes the deck a lot stronger in that sense. But I don't know. I think, in my experience climbing, I don't think it's that strong. It has it does new stuff now with the priest card added in the mini expansion. But I would actually say it's probably around C tier. Vengeance. This is Vengeance Blood, right? Yeah. So here's the thing with Vengeance Blood. I think in my 2 months of playing ranked and unranked, Vengeance, I've only ever seen one Vengeance Blood. The more popular Bloodcraft was Wrath Blood, which it's something on its own. And I think the only Vengeance Blood I did play against, I actually crushed it. All right, because yeah, I don't know. I hit my timings, they couldn't, and then I just since they're just trying to trigger their vengeance, eventually they push themselves into a situation where I can just kill them with the Nobilis and Philly combo. But I don't see, that's the thing. I don't know what I can say with the deck. In my personal experience, I would probably say it's around D tier. Not because it's like a terrible deck, but because if you're gonna play Bloodcraft, I do think Wrath Blood is perhaps the better deck right now. Let's actually do that next. Wrath Blood, oh man. Let me tell you about Wrath Blood. It is perhaps one of the harder decks to play against because they have early taunt control, which is very problematic for super aggressive decks in early game. And then they have that 3-drop that clears boards by doing 1 damage continually. Phenomenal card. And in their own sense, their early game is very similar to Force's early game, which is all of the early game is all about setup for your mid and late game. And then mid and late game, it's where you can actually do your power cards for for your lethal kill, right? Blood does that, except they have the addition of taunts and heals as well as board clear. However, I think pre-expansion, it was probably around the S tier. I think it was actually the best deck of pre-expansion format in Academy of Ages. But post, it's still a strong deck, but right now it's getting outshined by a lot of some other decks, right? So because of that, I think it's around A. It's still a strong deck, but other decks are just stronger than it at the moment. And then, oh, this is our Mysteria Rune? Oh boy, let me so Mysteria Rune is a genuinely very scary card, I feel. Because they have control, they have heal, they have board clear, and then once they hit into late game, they just overwhelm you with their power. Man, climbing the ladder pre was, I would say it was I would say it was about a 50-50, depending on my draw and their draw and sequencing of cards. It was either I can overwhelm them before they can get their setup and they lose, or they overwhelm me with their control and setup, and mid and late game I just cannot eke out the pressure that I needed to close out the game, right? However, I think post expansion, Mr. Rune is perhaps the other S tier up here. I do think it does lose to Burial Rite. Burial Rite is just such a strong deck right now, right? Now moving on, it is Mara's Sword. Here's the thing with Mara's Sword, right? It is a fairly cheap deck, actually. And it has very clear strengths and clear weaknesses. It's an aggro deck just like Fairy Forest. The only difference is Mars is insane, and it's because was it early game it's about pressure. Mid game, once you get Mars out, it's about slowly chipping away at your opponent until they're in kill range, and then you just kill them, right? And Mars does that really well, especially since a lot of their cards are going to be low cost. You can actually get bodies on the board really early on. So in terms of strength, I would say Mars is around B tier. It's still a great deck to climb with. I would actually put it above Fairycraft because of it's fairly cheap. It's really good to climb with. And it's very, in my opinion, it's fairly easy to execute Mars Sword. It is a great deck to climb with. It does lose to specifically like Bloodcraft and the top decks because they can answer a lot of the threats that Mars Sword puts on early game. And in my experience, when I played against Mars Sword, it always usually comes down to two things. It's, can I hit my legendaries on the perfect timing compared to them? And can I out aggro them before they can out aggro me? Because usually in aggression versus aggression matchups, it's whoever can out aggro the other person is gonna win out, unless you're playing like, you know, a different idea. Unless you're taking the more control and overwhelm them with resources, which is also a viable option. But if you're playing aggro, you want to play to your deck strength, right? Not their weaknesses. What is this? This is Discard Dragon. Oh, I forgot to mention. I think Mars Sword is perhaps one of the better decks to climb with, mostly because it's cheap, it's really easy to execute. But I feel it's gonna hit into. I think once you hit into B rank, you're gonna hit into a wall where decks are gonna be pretty difficult for you to beat. Like I have that issue right now in B rank with Fairy Forest. Some decks are just too strong for me. And then this is Discard Dragon. Oh, Discard Dragon. Here's the thing. I haven't played into a lot of Discard Dragon. It's mostly Buff Dragon that I see a lot of. But I do think Discard Dragon. I don't know actually. Now that I think about it, Discard Dragon I think is strong. It does a lot more different things compared to Buff Dragon because it has more. In my opinion, Discard Dragon has a lot more aggression, and Buff Dragon has a lot of the control or not control, trade value. Like you can't getting over a. So, but Discard Dragon, I think I would probably say it's around B tier. How high on the B tier? I wouldn't know. With most Discard Dragons, I actually beat them because most of them aren't able to handle the aggression from a Fairy Forest, right? Now, Buff Dragon. Here, I think Buff Dragon is a really good a really good deck. Joe is insane, in my opinion, because it not only gives you stats on your cards, but he recycles himself, and then when he comes out, he's insane, right? But the thing is, it's setup. And if you can't control the early game, oftentimes you're gonna lose out to aggression, right? From that, I would say it's around A tier in my opinion. It is still fairly easy to execute. You just have to know like how to sequence your cards and when to clear boards and all that stuff. Because once you get into your mid and late game, when your buffs start stacking up like crazy, that's when you really shine. And then you just simply out-resource your opponent with your big dudes, right? Now, this is Amulet Haven. Ooh, let me tell you about Amulet Haven. When I was like hovering around, was it C, I think, or B? There was a lot of Amulet Haven apparently. And Amulet Haven is always, they have, what is it? How would I say this? It's strong and weak depending on how you draw, right? It has the pseudo consistency in that it can play a lot of draw cards. It plays control and it plays words and heals, right? Which is great, because what you want to do with Amulet Haven is you want to control until you hit into the late game, and then you just absolutely destroy every board your opponent has, right? But if you don't hit those early game cards, you can easily get overwhelmed and eventually die, right? I would probably say it's around C tier. I don't think it is the best deck to climb. I do think it has shining moments if it hits its perfect sequencing, but it does have very, very clear weaknesses to me. And if you can't hold on, or if you can't hold on and survive until your power point, where you can just, overwhelm your opponent, I mean, what else is there to say? You're unfortunately going to lose, right? So that's it, guys. That's my thoughts on what decks you guys should, the decks that are great for climbing. It is expensive to craft these decks. Well, maybe not Mars Sword. Mars Sword is pretty straightforward, right? Tell me what you guys think about this tier list. Leave some comments below to let me know. And if you like this video, hey, give me a thumbs up, subscribe. I greatly appreciate that. And hit that bell for notifications on any upcoming contents and stream of that sorts. Until then, I'll see you guys next time now. All right? Bye, guys. Bye-bye now.